Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to have you here with us today on International Human Rights Day. Thank you so much for coming along. I'll begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on the land of the Turrbal and Yagara people and pay my respects to elders past and present. Also pay my respects to First Nations people joining us online today, as well as First Nations people joining us in the room today. I'd also like to pay respects to acknowledge that there are people online who are joining us from all over Queensland, and pay my respects to the traditional owners of all of the lands across Queensland, pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. As I said, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're really excited to have you with us, and we're really excited to have our new Minister, Minister Enoch, with us today. Before I give a little background on Minister Enoch, I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the QT Centre for Justice for hosting the event this morning. So wonderful to have Minister Enoch with us today. We would absolutely like to take the opportunity to congratulate the Minister on her re-election, as well as her appointment into this, what we think is an incredibly important portfolio of communities, housing, the arts and the digital economy. It's so fantastic to have a minister like Minister Enoch in the portfolio, someone with such experience. The Minister has already held the portfolios of environment and the Great Barrier Reef, science, and has previously been in the housing and public works portfolio. We know our Minister is very well versed in community development and social justice issues. The Minister has previously worked at the Australian Red Cross, and she has previously been a director of the QCOSS board. Minister Enoch was the first Aboriginal woman to be elected into Queensland Parliament and is the first Indigenous minister in the Legislative Assembly here in Queensland. We are absolutely thrilled to have the Minister here with us today and really looking forward to working with her over the next 4 years. So as I said, it is International Human Rights Day today, and just to talk a little bit about the relevance of the day, today marks the anniversary of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. That declaration really was the result of countries across the world coming together, recognising, this was after the Second World War, recognising what can happen when government power is unbridled. And human rights provide minimum standards that governments should not encroach. Minimum standards that afford us all lives characterised by freedom, respect, equality and dignity. Today is a really important day. It's wonderful that we're holding our event today. The theme for the International Human Rights Day is Recover Better, Stand Up for Human Rights. And isn't that an apt theme for International Human Rights Day and also for our discussion today? We are talking about the budget with Minister Enoch today, but more broadly, this budget discussion is really centred and focused on a recovery from a really significant economic and health crisis. QCOSS has been talking about COVID a lot this year, and particularly focusing our advocacy work on what a recovery should look like. A recovery must be for all Queenslanders. It must support the well-being of Queenslanders. We must be focused on creating jobs and opportunities for all Queenslanders so that no one's left behind, and also make sure that our community services sector is strong, is well-resourced and resilient, so that it provides a really good safety net for people when they need it. So as I said, the purpose of today's event is really about talking about the budget. It is a very unusual year, and usually we wouldn't be talking about a budget in December. And also QCOSS would normally be hosting a budget breakfast, and it's something we love doing, and we will absolutely, all things going well, look forward to welcoming you all to a traditional QCOSS budget breakfast when the next budget comes around in the not too distant future next year. So this budget that we're talking about today is clearly a really significant first step for the re-elected Palaszczuk government. It signals to us a bit about the government's vision for the next 4 years. Overall, QCOSS's assessment of the budget is that it is not a budget of our time. We are really pleased to see some of the measures in the budget, particularly the focus on frontline services and an investment in education. Although we do note that while there is a focus on frontline services, community organisations have not significantly been conceived of as part of that frontline service workforce. The budget, we say the budget is not a budget of this time because we know right now that we are going through a significant economic downturn, and that we have a real opportunity now to borrow money. You know, it's an unusual opportunity where the public are saying to government, we accept that you need to borrow money. QCOSS would like to see that money invested in a way that will stimulate growth across the community and benefit all Queenslanders moving into a better future. We don't want to borrow to build, to rebuild. We want to borrow to build back better, to build a better future for all of us. As I said, there's some really good aspects to this budget. I've mentioned the investment in education. QCOSS was really excited to see the $4 million investment over 2 years in the no interest loan scheme. This commitment is a direct response to a campaign that was launched by QCOSS members this year seeking proper funding for the no interest loan scheme. I want to take this moment just to thank all the QCOSS members who were involved in that really important campaign. We also are really welcoming of the government's commitments in community, health, education and energy, including money invested in putting more frontline workers in community and neighbourhood centres to do COVID-19 crisis work, an additional $1.5 million to respond to domestic and family violence, $5 million investing in an awareness campaign to raise awareness about elder abuse. Obviously, as I've mentioned, extra teachers and teacher aides, $100 million investment for psychologists and counsellors in schools across Queensland, a $500 million renewable energy fund to invest in publicly owned renewable electrical generation, and a $145 million investment into 3 Queensland renewable energy zones. So absolutely want to say up front that there are some great things in this budget that we're really pleased to see. On the other hand, we think this budget is a missed opportunity. We have seen governments across Australia sort of borrowing to invest in building a better future in their state. We know that the COVID-19 crisis is really different to other natural disasters. This has absolutely been a human disaster. We have had significant impacts to our health, to our economic well-being, and when I say our health, obviously including our mental health, and when economic security is under threat, that has flow-on effects for things like housing security. We were really disappointed that this budget did not include a significant investment in public housing. We were really excited to see recently the $5.3 billion investment into building more public housing in Victoria. We know that's going to build 12,000 new homes over the next 4 years and create around 10,000 jobs for Victorians. This is a bold vision, and it's the type of investment that is required if we're going to turn the dial on homelessness and create significant jobs for Queenslanders. We also were disappointed that there has been no significant investment in making the existing public housing stock energy efficient. We're in Queensland, we've all been feeling the heat over the last few weeks. We're thinking about older people, young families, people with disability who are living in public housing who don't have the resources to turn on the air conditioning. QCOSS proposed a $215 million investment that would see the creation of thousands of jobs around Queensland and making public housing energy efficient, and then reducing the energy bills of people living in public housing by around $1,100 a month. We also, as I sort of already alluded to, think that the recognition of the community services sector as vital to both a response to a crisis and a recovery from it has not been properly reflected in the budget. QCOSS had asked the government to put aside $40 million in a community sector resilience fund, which would allow community organisations to pitch their ideas about dealing with local issues in local areas and employ people into the community services sector. And we were knowing that this crisis has been what people describe a pink collar crisis, meaning women have been more significantly impacted in terms of employment, that we know investment into our sector will result in jobs for women. So I would, that's just a few of the things we had to say about this budget. I would refer you all to our more detailed analysis. I believe it's been emailed out to everyone, but if you haven't received it, it is available on our website under the Resources tab. Looking forward, this is, how do you even put words around 2020? It has been an absolutely extraordinary year, culminating in the re-election of the Palaszczuk government, and now we're here talking about a budget in December. Throughout the year, QCOSS has been advocating for a recovery for all Queenslanders. We'll continue to push this agenda. We will continue to work with government to ensure that we are building back better, that we are creating a better future. We're not looking back. We're not seeking to go back to the way things were, but we're seeking to move forward and create a better future, a future where Queenslanders don't live in poverty. We know that as much as we all like to say goodbye 2020, let's hope 2021 is better. All of us in the sector know that 2021 is shaping up to be a really difficult year. As income support tapers down, we know that we have hundreds of thousands of Queenslanders who are relying on that support, hundreds of thousands of kids that are reliant on parents that are whose only income source is income support. And so we know we're facing another tricky year. And we will continue to work with you, our members, and with the Queensland Government to make sure that those Queenslanders are taken into consideration when we build back better and when we have a recovery for all Queenslanders. So with that long-winded introduction, Minister, I'd love to invite you to make some opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Amy, and of course, can I also begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathering here and the lands on which you are all meeting us from, and of course pay my respects to the more than 3,000 generations of traditional owners who have maintained cultural practices on this country, and can I acknowledge all of our elders from wherever you come from, whatever your culture, those that are past and those still with us, guiding us into the future. Can I of course just thank Amy and everybody from QCOSS for the invitation today. It is an unusual time of year to be having this conversation. As Amy's already pointed out, obviously we would normally see a budget in the middle of the year and the opportunity to have a budget breakfast that QCOSS normally holds. But here we are, and I guess it's that kind of approach that we're seeing throughout 2020 that gives us that sense of, well, this is what we've got, we're going to have to deal with it and we're going to have to keep moving. Just 4 weeks ago, I was appointed as the new Minister for Communities and Housing, the Minister for Digital Economy and the Minister for the Arts 4 weeks ago today. So and of course during this 4 weeks we've had a budget week and now preparation for estimates that's ongoing right now as we speak. So it's been very unusual, and there'll be still some time before I'm able to speak with some real authority on where the future is with regards to this portfolio. And I note some of the questions that we'll be able to answer today and look at today, that there'll still be some, for me, some forming of ideas and direction. So I hope everybody is understanding of the fact of the situation that we're in right now. Can I thank everybody for the incredible work that they've done throughout 2020. I think the word unprecedented, the word pivot, these all have become pretty much part of our everyday vocabulary and our everyday understanding of what we need to be, how we need to address our current situation and how we need to look to the future. So I want to thank everybody for the incredible work that you've done. I know on a normal day, in a normal year, that you go above and beyond to support people across your community, but this year in particular has seen even further demands on your time and your resources and your ability to give. So I want to thank you very much for that. I thought I might start with a bit of an introduction about who I am and where I come from. That might give you some sense of where I might be looking to into the future. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the aspects of the budget, and then I thought I'd give more time for us to explore questions so that we can move more into that bigger conversation, you know, that more deeper, bigger conversation in a more casual way about where we want to go to in the years to come. So my name is Leeanne Enoch. I'm a Quandamooka woman originally from beautiful Minjerribah. You might know it as North Stradbroke Island. My ancestry is in Morgumpan, Moreton Island, and my grandmother was a Kaanju woman from the far north of Queensland around the Coen area. My mother's people, so that's my father's people, my mother's people are from an English, Irish, apparently there's some Danish and some Spanish in there somewhere, so on my mum's side we're about fourth generation Australian. On my dad's side, of course, we're thousands of generations attached to this place. My background in terms of work, I started my working career as a teacher, as a high school teacher. Had the chance to work not just in the Greater Brisbane area but in regional Queensland, and an opportunity to work in East London for a few years, where I really learned a lot about the importance of education and its connection to the broader community fabric, and how important aspects of social justice are to the lives of young people, their families and the communities they're connected to. And of course when you live overseas for a few years and you come back, I had this chance to see our country and our policies in a very different light, which made me very determined to work more in the policy space, and I found myself in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander education policy, and then in state government in that space. Worked a little while in local government and Brisbane City Council, also looking at social policy and social justice, and then before coming into politics, headed up a national team with the Australian Red Cross, where of course, you know, the largest, or one of the largest humanitarian organisations in the world, where you get to learn a great deal about the intersect of various aspects of our society and our service delivery and its impact on an individual's rights, a human's rights, and of course the social justice fabric of our community. So that's a bit of my background. I didn't grow up in a leafy suburb or anything like that. My family and I grew up in public housing in a suburb called Woodridge in Logan in Brisbane. And so my mum still lives in that same house that we moved into 46 years ago. She had the opportunity to purchase that property in the 80s when there was that program of work that had come through. So I am very much somebody who has lived experience in terms of living very close to the poverty line, depending on public housing, and of course some of the complexities of living in a community that is managing incredibly deep, complex issues. So that is my background. In terms of the budget, of course, this budget is, again, and we hear this word, unprecedented. At this stage, we know Queensland's done a remarkable job, an absolutely remarkable job in terms of responding to the health crisis. And, you know, that is a credit to every single Queenslander who stepped up, complied with the directions of the Chief Health Officer, and of course we all were able to keep each other safe during that time. But as we know, during that time there was a huge impact on our economy. And the fact that we were able to maintain our response to the health crisis in the way that we have, we are now being able to look more fulsomely at our response to the economic recovery as a result of the pandemic. And of course, we've seen a record investment in health, a record investment in education, and of course in community safety. And this is on top of the fact that just a few years ago we saw a record investment in public housing, $1.6 billion investment in public housing, the largest investment since World War II. And that has been continuing on, and we've seen that honoured in this budget as well. Just over $1 billion is committed to housing and homelessness in this state, in this budget, something that of course I'm looking for further innovative ways to be able to leverage those funds to support the work that you all do and the broader sector does. I've had the opportunity just this week to be able to visit some of the places where we've seen construction happening right now for new social housing builds, and that's happening right across the state. On top of that, Aimee mentioned the fact that we're seeing some terrific investment in renewables, and as the former Environment Minister, I'm incredibly proud of the fact that we're seeing that investment. I think that gives us the opportunity to talk into the future about how we leverage that investment more broadly in the social sector to be able to support greater impact in terms of renewables in the years to come. But I think one of the things that we, inside of all of these record investments in our frontline services, we do need to recognise that this is an extraordinary time, and the budget is matching that extraordinary time to be able to ensure that we're rebounding from the economic crisis that the pandemic has placed upon Queensland and Australia and the world. There is, as soon as we finish estimates, there is another budget cycle ready to go, and we're starting those consultations and negotiations now, ready for the normal budget cycle of June next year. So, there's a great deal of work to be done between now and when the next budget is handed down. And certainly we've seen the borrowings that we've had to take to be able to get through the economic crisis in this budget. And I'm certainly looking for opportunities to be able to leverage this investment in the next budget, which we'll see in June. And hopefully, if the pandemic continues to be well managed in Queensland and across our nation, we'll be able to continue to see the opportunity to leverage in a more normalised way that we do with regards to setting up budgets. So with those few words, I think I'll leave it now open for us to answer some questions and the potential for us to move back and forward with a bit of a conversation about, as normal human beings, about how we see Queensland into the years to come, knowing that there are still lots of unknowns in all of this. There's still lots of unknowns. The pandemic has not ended. We've done well in Queensland. We're waiting on vaccines, and of course it's looking promising right across the world, but the pandemic has not finished. And we could be faced with variations of what's been happening this year into the future, and we need to be prepared for that. So, our ability to talk openly and reasonably with each other is one that I think is going to hold us in good stead into, into the future. So thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Minister, and also thank you so much for your generosity in sharing a bit about yourself and your background with us. I think when you refer to us as normal humans, that's very nice. But also, I think it's a nice, way to start the conversation is reflecting on where you've come from and sharing that with us to remind us of the person that you are coming into this portfolio, and reminding us that our elected leaders are people with histories and backgrounds and real passion for the area that they're working in. So thank you for setting the conversation sort of in that way. Look, we've talked about, the fact that we're in this really tricky time in terms of a recession, and I think, some of the forecasting shows that hopefully we will see some pretty quick recovery. But we also know, of course, that these types of recessions impact people who are experiencing disadvantage and marginalisation in a very different way, and that the recovery will be bumpy, and for those particular people it probably will be more painful. We know that with the drop-off in income support, there's going to be real pressure on household budgets. And I guess, what we have seen some people do when they have that pressure is go to payday lenders. And they can then spiral into really unmanageable debt. So, I guess this has been an issue for a long time, a long-standing issue, and obviously as pressure on household budgets increase, then we're worried that this will become a bigger issue. And so that's why this year QCOSS members got together and really started to campaign a little bit more heavily for an investment in the no interest loan scheme. So for those joining us today who are not familiar with the no interest loan scheme, it is a scheme administered by community organisations whereby people can get access to small loans, which they do pay back. But they pay back in a way that's manageable for them, and no interest is charged. The loans are processed by community organisations, and currently our organisations do that without funding, so often relying heavily on volunteers, which, as we all know, when we don't get funding to deliver a particular service, it does sort of hamper or limit our capacity to do the work as widely as we'd like to, and promote the work and put resources behind it. So we actually do have a question now from Gillian Marshall from Logan East Community Neighbourhood Centre. Gillian was involved in the campaign for funding for NILS. So over to you, Gillian.
Hello, my name is Gillian Marshall. I'm from the Logan East Community Neighbourhood Association. We are one of the few loan providers in Queensland, and we have staff that are highly skilled and deliver excellent volume of loans, but they're on short-term contracts till June next year. I would like to congratulate your government for the commitment of $2 million for the next 2 years into 20 financial resilience workers throughout the state who will be NILS accredited and part of the NILS community network. I would like to note that every other state in Australia, we do see a meaningful, sustainable, place-based commitment to the NILS community network. So my question to you is, what will ongoing and sustainable investment into the place-based NILS community network look like by your government now and into the future?
Gillian, and of course, I think we all understand that, when under pressure, and I've got personal stories attached to my own family with regards to this, that quite often individuals and families will turn to, rather, to me, I find them quite unsavoury in terms of payday lenders. And certainly I know that there's been a lot of conversation at the federal level about the regulatory system around those payday lenders, and I think that's something that ACOSS has been very much involved in as well. And of course we're in a bit of a bubble, aren't we? The federal government actually stepped up and provided funding in a way that supported individuals and families, and those measures, as we all understand from the federal government, will taper off next year, and they're beginning to taper off already, JobKeeper and JobSeeker. Although, JobKeeper in its design didn't really capture everybody, so there are others that have other workers that have not necessarily been supported in that. Of course, I think every day we should be requesting the federal government to continue looking at that structure to ensure that there is fairness going forward. I mean, that is a really important part of our conversations going forward. I can't stress that enough, that the federal government should be continuing to look at those measures and the way that Queenslanders and Australians will be supported beyond March, as I understand it, next year with regards to JobKeeper and JobSeeker. In the meantime, however, the support of financial services in particular for Queenslanders has been a bit of a focus for the Palaszczuk government since 2015. Many of you will know that there's been support for the Good Money stores through Good Shepherd, and that's been an important part, a plank in the work that we've been doing, and of course the commitments in the budget to continue that work around no interest loans is very important. That investment in terms of financial literacy and resilience actually is around $7 million in the budget. So that's comprised of the financial literacy and resilience services, about $3.7 million. The $1.2 million to operate the Good Money stores in Cairns and Southport, those Good Money stores that are giving us some really great data in terms of, how do we support people who are seeking that kind of financial support in a really safe way that enables them not to become even more stressed financially as a result of seeking that kind of support. And of course, the financial support for the statewide coordination of the No Interest Loans network by Good Shepherd, and the $2 million as part of the government's election commitment to provide that financial counselling support and that pathway to the No Interest Loans scheme. And of course, other microfinance products where appropriate. And of course, we continue to work with QCOSS. It's a very important part of being able to support people who are at risk of being in crisis or who are in crisis. Certainly we don't want to see more Queenslanders turning to payday lenders when there are other options, and that's why we've supported those options through this year's budget. But we'll continue to work with QCOSS and other providers to ensure that we're looking at ways to support people into the future.
Yeah, I think, Minister, that sort of reflection of the importance of income support, does need to be underscored. QCOSS obviously works really closely with our QOS network around the country and with ACOSS, and will be absolutely continuing to push for that rate of income support to be above the poverty line, for that rate to be raised for good. So not a supplement, a proper level of income support for people, so that people, including children, are not living in poverty. We know that is a really important part of making sure that Queenslanders are looked after in terms of financial well-being. And then, we need to have those other additional pieces, because the thing about this crisis is that, some people have fallen into relying now on income support where they hadn't expected to, and so can have liabilities which don't match income, and so it is important also to have those things like the no interest loan scheme that give those sort of additional supports. But as we know, another really, really important part of keeping people out of poverty is housing security. And the Minister, I've heard her speak about this this week, where she talks about it's not just the roof over your head, but it's also the things that happen under the roof. And I think that's a really important way of conceiving it. We need to think about, one, making sure that people do have a roof over their head, and then two, what's going on inside the house. Do we have the supports in place to make sure that people are able to have lives, I guess, characterised by respect for their dignity and their basic human rights. I did note the reference that you made before, Minister, to the investment, the ongoing investment that the Palaszczuk government has made in relation to public housing. However, given the pressure on the public housing system, we know we've got around 25,600 families sitting on the public housing waiting list. We've got 22,000 Queenslanders who are currently homeless. And one of the really different things, I think, that's a result of the pandemic and the Queensland government's sort of management of the pandemic is this migration that we're expecting next year. I think the Treasurer estimated would have about 80,000 people moving into Queensland next year. So with the high levels of unemployment and underemployment, the pressure on the public housing waiting list, more people becoming Queenslanders, we know that there is a real issue in terms of not just public housing but affordable housing. I guess we've all been pretty excited to see the movement that has happened in Victoria and New South Wales in terms of making that really significant sort of turn the dial investment that is addressing these really long-standing issues in housing and homelessness. We obviously, we've got precedent in terms of investment in public housing and that being a smart way to stimulate the economy during the GFC. In 2009, the Rudd government made an investment in public housing, and now we're seeing that sort of that model replicated in other states. I guess the other thing is that we know that during this pandemic, particularly during lockdown, we've had an escalation in violence against women. And so another reason why we need more housing, we need housing for women who are needing to leave their homes and build a better and more independent life. We have actually now got a question online from our member Kim Byrne from Nawumba House in Mount Isa on this point.
Hi, I'm Kim Byrne and I work for Nawumba House, a domestic and family violence shelter in Mount Isa. Running a women's shelter, it is clear that being able to secure safe and appropriate housing is essential for women to build independence and escape domestic and family violence. What is your government doing to improve the supply of housing for women escaping domestic and family violence? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the question. And obviously, I don't often talk about this, but I have a lived experience in terms of domestic and family violence, and so I know what it's like to flee a home in the middle of the night as a young woman. And I was very lucky when that happened to me in my 20s, that I had family and friends to be able to go to for that sort of support, and I didn't have children to take with me. But I understand how that can be exacerbated and made more stressful and more complex when you're facing those domestic violence and family violence situations when you've got young children. So I recognise that. And that's why I was very pleased to see the Not Now, Not Ever report and the way that the Palaszczuk government responded to that. We've seen record investments in that space, the establishment of domestic violence or women escaping domestic violence shelters now being built across the state. These are all new assets that we've been able to utilise to be able to support women who are facing that very thing that I faced when I was in my 20s, who don't have the family support structures to be able to escape in a safe way. And of course that continued support is part of how we manage what we call the social housing register. The register is a very, very important tool. It's one that allows us to be able to work directly with those who are seeking assistance. And of course, if there is a situation of extreme crisis, our staff, the housing staff across the state, respond appropriately, finding safe accommodation in the short term and then support through to the long term. Aimee mentioned the number of households who are currently on our housing register. Of course, that is just one piece of the bigger picture of what's happening across our state. There are more than 80,000 people who have also been supported into other housing and accommodation across Queensland. Those who have needed crisis accommodation, of course, and those who are now moving into more permanent accommodation and outcomes for themselves and their household. And so that's why this year in the budget, what we're seeing is through the Department of Child Safety, Youth and Women, an allocation of $34.7 million to fund 48 funded organisations to deliver 59 specialist homelessness services and other support services to women and children in particular experiencing domestic and family violence. We're utilising this funding for services that will provide a total of 322 places of accommodation for women and children per night in 2020-2021. And of course, under the $9.9 million Queensland Housing Strategy, under the Housing Strategy, $9.9 million has been allocated for enhanced services, including flexible assistance packages for up to $5,000 in brokerage dollars for goods and services needed immediately to maintain and access that safe housing. So there are a suite of different programs across a number of different government agencies that are supporting women and children who are experiencing domestic and family violence. Working, of course, even through the COVID period where those extra pressures were being put on families, just over $24 million that was put in place to support people during those who were experiencing housing crisis during that time, particularly those families and women who are experiencing domestic and family violence. There's always going to be more to do, and the Not Now, Not Ever report, and of course our response to that, our government action plan in that space, continues to drive actions, and I think that is a good thing. That the Not Now, Not Ever report is able to continue to really focus our efforts and focus our direction to be able to support women in those situations.
Thanks, Minister, and again, thank you for being so open and sharing your personal story with us. I think, when women such as yourself, leaders in our community, share those sorts of experiences, it does help us to destigmatise issues around domestic violence and realise that these issues are so prevalent in our communities and affect all kinds of women. So thank you very much for sharing that story. We have had this opportunity over the last few months to sort of sit down with our members and hear from them about what's going on in their local communities, and obviously what comes through so strongly is how enmeshed people are in their communities, how they really know what their communities need, and have just the best ideas about how to deal with the issues in their local communities. And one of the things that sort of comes up for people is if only we had the freedom within our contracts to kind of deliver the things that we know our community needs. And I've talked to many members who sort of bemoan the paperwork that they're sort of snowed under with trying to comply with all the contracts. And this includes our community controlled organisations who are just so essential in terms of delivering services to First Nations people that are truly come from the principle of self-determination. So on that kind of question, on that issue of funding and your commitment and your government's commitment to self-determination, we have a question online from Carla Brady from Inala Wangara reflecting on these points.
Hello, Minister Enoch. My name is Carla Brady and I am the CEO of Inala Wangara, which is an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community-controlled community development organisation operating within the Southwest Corridor of Brisbane. Firstly, on behalf of Inala Wangara's board and staff, I would like to congratulate you on your re-election. We're extremely pleased that you are the Minister for Communities. Inala Wangara has never received a cent of funding from the Department of Communities in the 17 years we've been operating. and we are punished for that by having to pay market rent for the departmental building that also houses our elders. My question is, given your government's strong commitment for track to treaty and the reframing of its relationship with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, what does that mean for the Department of Communities and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community-controlled sector? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Carla, and of course a big hello to everybody out at Inala Wangara and all of the elders there who I've had the great pleasure of working with and spending time with probably over the last 20 years. So lovely to receive this question from all of you. Can I just start by saying that I've already asked the Director General of the Department of Communities and Housing, Digital Economy and the Arts to reach out to Inala Wangara to have some meaningful conversations about the issues that you've raised, Carla, but also have a conversation about, you know, the innovative ways we can look at the future and the relationship between the Department of Communities and Housing and Inala Wangara and other organisations that are have similar circumstances to yourselves. But I want to touch a bit on your question about treaty. For me, the tracks to treaty, the path to treaty is an incredibly significant and important one, not just for First Nations people, but for all Queenslanders. It is beyond time to be able to now sit and share the true history of our state and our country. It is an uncomfortable truth in many ways. It is quite ugly, our history, our shared history, at times. And we need to be able to be very honest about what that looks like and what that's felt like and the legacy that it has left. And of course, as we move towards treaty, our ability to reframe government's relationship with First Nations people is at the forefront. What we want to see is thriving communities across our state. The treaty process will be one that is complex, it will be deep, it will be, in many times it will reveal and it will reveal some very deep wounds that we're going to have to work through. But we all have a role to play in that. And I think when First Nations peoples and services that are community controlled, when that is put at the forefront of our conversations, what we get is outcomes that benefit everybody. So I'm very much looking forward to the role that the Department of Communities and Housing, Digital Economy and the Arts will play in the reframing of our relationship, but also in our role in ensuring that treaty or treaties actually finds benefit for every Queenslander moving forward. It is, for me, a significantly important conversation to have, and I'm looking forward to the structures that will be put in place to support treaty in the future, and I look forward to the work that and the conversations that we'll have with organisations like Inala Wangara and others to help us reach the best possible outcome when it comes to conversations about our partnerships, our relationships, and of course our formal relationships through track to treaty or treaties.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. And I think you're right. It's a really significant conversation to have, and QCOSS is absolutely looking forward to being, part of that conversation and part of understanding and working with our members to understand what this significant shift in thinking means for service delivery for First Nations people, and for putting our community-controlled organisations at the front of that response.
That is very encouraging to hear, and I'll be looking forward to working with you and seeing more Indigenous people employed in QCOSS, for instance, and some structures put in place to ensure that there's good representation in QCOSS with regards to First Nations voices. That's certainly something that I'm working on in my own department. It is only 4 weeks in, of course, but if you look at the work that I was able to direct in the Department of Environment and Science with regards to the voices of First Nations people, you'll see the kind of thinking that I bring to and that I hope to see happening in the Department of Communities and Housing.
That's wonderful to hear, and it's wonderful to have such an example to be led by. So thank you, Minister. I guess sort of moving away from that, but it is sort of slightly related, I guess, in terms of just the organisations that are really embedded in communities that help respond to things like COVID, and now I'm talking more about our neighbourhood centres and community centres. We know that they were at the forefront of the response to COVID and are always there, both in crisis and in other times. We know that reforms of neighbourhood centres and community centres have been on the government's agenda for some time, and we have a question online from Karen Dare from Communify on this point.
Hello Minister, I'm interested in your commitment to adequately resourcing and acknowledging the value of neighbourhood centres across Queensland. And also, can you speak to the future of centres as key multi-service community hubs, utilising valuable existing infrastructure and well-established local networks to support our communities?
Well, thanks, Karen, and thank you for raising this question. In the 4 weeks that I've been in this role, one of the areas that I have been very energised by and I have a lot of excitement about is the role of neighbourhood and community centres. When you consider that there's 125 of them across the state currently, what an incredible resource base for the kind of work that we need to see, not just now through a pandemic, but in terms of really connecting communities, creating socially just, connected families and communities that we want to be that are fit for the future in terms of the kinds of challenges that we're faced with. And so I'm really energised by the idea of what we can be doing even more so in the neighbourhood and community centre space. Yes, reform I think is a word that I've been using quite a lot in the last couple of weeks. I think there's a great opportunity in that space. If you consider during the pandemic, or the height of the restrictions of the pandemic I should say, because the pandemic is still underway, more than 28,000 people signed up to be part of the Care Army. It sort of indicates that Queenslanders are ready and willing to be part of a bigger story, something to be connected to something bigger than themselves. And right now my sense is that in some places, neighbourhood and community centres, there are some who are operating above and beyond what would be expected of them. And then there are others that are not necessarily being fully utilised for what they could be doing in those communities. And I'm very, very excited to be looking much more closely at the structure of those centres, the role that they can play in a more modern sense, given everything that we've been dealing with this year and what we're going to be facing into the years to come. And certainly some of the desktop kind of reviews that have been happening over the many years give us a bit of a foundation of looking at now at what do we do next. And of course we have seen some investment in neighbourhood centres, an increase in the investment in neighbourhood centres since their inception. From memory this year there's about just under $20 million that's being committed to neighbourhood and community centres off the top of my head. So that has been an increase over time. But of course we need to understand their place now. There's been, for some, I've got some a community and neighbourhood centre in my own electorate who over the years have been bolting on various services because you step up to meet the need of your community. And with all the bolting on of stuff that happens over time, quite often you start to see your purpose getting muddied and all of that. So I'm really very, very interested, Karen, in being able to get stuck into that space. I think it's something that we should be looking at some reform opportunities given everything that we've been facing this year and what we're going to need as a community going forward.
Yeah, and I think, tying it back to the budget, we were really pleased to see that investment in community and neighbourhood centres. I think it's, sort of the support that they need while the reform piece is happening. And we are all sort of waiting with bated breath to hear more about the reforms, and in particular the Griffith University review.
Absolutely.
That we haven't yet had
But
access
I think,
to.
Even in that, I think there's an opportunity for co-design, and we're talking about we want innovation in this space. I know that that's a bit of a catch-all kind of word that we've been using, but ultimately, to have innovation, you need creativity. To have creativity, you need diversity. So we need diversity of voice and perspective, and to co-design so that we can actually create something that will be innovative and set us up for the future. And
I think the other thing I'd add to that is flexibility. In order to be creative and innovative, there needs to be flexibility as well. Great. Minister, we're almost out of time, and I think I could certainly sit here all day and pick your brain with all of the incredible expertise, both professional and personal, that you bring to the role. I know that your schedule right now is just insanely busy, and I really love, when I say, how do you do it, you reframing it and saying it's about the why, it's about why we do it. And I think that's a really wonderful way to think about why you're doing the work, and it's clear to us why you're doing the work through the things that you've said this morning. So thank you so very much for coming and participating with us today so openly.
You're so welcome, and thank you so much for the warm welcome that I've received from so many across the sector. I'm looking forward to working with everybody.
I want to just quickly go back and remind you that it is International Human Rights Day, and this year in Queensland we are marking sort of the end of the first year of the operation of Queensland's Human Rights Act. Next Thursday, QCOSS is putting on an event, the last for the year in our series about human rights in action in Queensland, and I really would encourage you all to attend. Thank you all so much for attending this morning. I really appreciate your ongoing commitment to QCOSS and your engagement with us. If you want to become more engaged in QCOSS, please follow us on social media and get in touch if you'd like to be involved in any of our new policy networks, which have just met for the first time this year and will be continuing into next year. Our policy networks on housing and homelessness, living affordability and women's equality. I want to thank you all so much for your incredible work this year, your work responding to our community just in this really trying time. I hope you all have an opportunity not just to rest over Christmas, but to truly reflect on the incredible work that you've done, that the community is grateful for, and I also do hope you get a chance to rest and recover. So thank you very much for your participation this morning, and have a wonderful day.